The town of Hawthorne was small enough that everyone knew each other's routines. Its streets were clean, lined with aged oak trees, their branches casting long shadows as the sun dipped behind the hills. To an outsider, it seemed idyllic, too calm, almost unnaturally so. For Clara Bennett, it was the perfect place to start over. After years in a bustling city filled with noise and danger, she longed for quiet, a fresh slate where she could rebuild her life. She moved into a modest apartment above a quaint bookstore. The rent was cheap, the landlord friendly, and the neighbors politely distant. Clara liked it that way. She thrived in observation, quietly watching the world unfold, recording details others ignored. Her mornings were predictable: a brisk walk through the main street, coffee at Marvin's Cafe, and a short visit to the library before settling in at her desk to write. It began subtly. At first, she noticed only small oddities: a shadow in the corner of her eye as she walked to the corner store, a car that seemed to follow her route home, turning onto her street as she did. She dismissed it at first. Perhaps she was imagining things. Hawthorne was supposed to be safe. People didn't follow strangers here. Then came the envelope. It was slipped under her apartment door one evening, white, plain, with no return address. Clara hesitated before picking it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, "You are noticed. You cannot hide." Her pulse quickened. She scanned the hallway. Empty, quiet, too quiet. She locked the door, triple-checked the windows, and tried to shake off the feeling, but sleep that night was impossible. Every creak, every gust of wind against the building sounded like footsteps outside her door. The next morning, she saw him. A man standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, hands in his coat pockets. He looked ordinary, too ordinary, but there was something in the way he watched her, the patience in his stance that unsettled her. When their eyes met, he smiled slightly, polite, harmless. But it wasn't harmless. Clara felt it down to her bones. For days he lingered, at the cafe on the street corner, walking past the library. Every time she looked, there he was, just far enough away to avoid confrontation, yet too close to ignore. Clara tried telling herself it was coincidence. Maybe he was a tourist, a passerby. But then the details piled up. The same car parked outside her favorite grocery store, his reflection catching her eye in the glass of the library doors, a hand waving to someone in the distance, but when she turned, he was alone. She mentioned it to Mrs. Daly, her neighbor from across the hall, a kindly woman who baked pies and knitted in the afternoons. "Maybe you're just imagining it, dear," Mrs. Daly said, offering a comforting smile. "This town is peaceful. Nothing ever happens here." Clara nodded, forcing herself to believe it, but deep down she knew she wasn't imagining it. She began keeping a journal of everything: time she left the apartment, when the man appeared, the color of his coat, his hairstyle, even the shoes he wore. Patterns emerged. He wasn't just following her randomly. He was studying her, learning her routines. A week passed and her unease became obsession. She walked different routes, altered her schedule, tried to lose him. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Always she caught a glimpse of him, lurking like a shadow just beyond reach. He didn't approach, didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence was enough. One evening, after finishing a long day of research for one article, Clara returned home to find the door ajar. Panic shot through her chest. She drew the small pepper spray from her bag and stepped inside cautiously. Her apartment was unchanged. No sign of forced entry, no footprints. But there it was, on the mirror in her bedroom. "I see you." Her hands shook as she took out her phone to call someone, anyone. But the line was dead. Not out of service, deliberately cut. She remembered Mrs. Daly's words, "Nothing ever happens here." How wrong she was. Sleep was impossible. Clara sat by the window, notebook in hand, jotting every thought, every fear, every memory of his appearances. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. Every shadow outside the glass, every flicker of movement made her heart leap. Days blurred together. She noticed the subtle things. The man at the corner of her street always had the same posture, the same expression, the same careful distance. He never ran, never hurried, never did anything to reveal panic. He was deliberate. He was patient. Then came the incident at Marvin's cafe. Clara sat sipping her latte, scrolling through local news on her tablet. She felt a presence behind her. A hand tapped her shoulder. She spun around. Empty. She glanced up. Across the street, near the bookstore, he was standing there, watching, smiling faintly. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't know what to do. The cafe was filled with people, neighbors, tourists, students. Everyone ignored him, or maybe they didn't see him the way she did. By now, paranoia had become hyper-awareness. Every footstep, every honking car, every barked dog sounded like a signal. She stopped going jogging at the usual time. She avoided the library. She began double-locking doors, taping windows. Yet in her mind, no barrier could keep him out. One rainy evening, Clara decided she had to know who he was. She followed him discreetly, notebook and camera in hand. He walked calmly, weaving through streets she knew well. Then, abruptly, he stopped in an alley. He looked around, seemingly alone, then turned his gaze back the way she was hiding. A chill ran down her spine. He knew she was following. She ducked behind a corner, heart hammering. He didn't run, didn't chase, didn't yell. He just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that promised patience, cunning, inevitability. Then he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Clara trembling in the rain, drenched, shivering, terrified, but alive. That night, Clara wrote furiously in her journal, observations, fears, strategies. She knew she couldn't tell anyone else. The town wouldn't understand. The police wouldn't believe her. And yet, one thought dominated every line she wrote. He's not stopping, and I have to stay ahead, or it will be too late. As she drifted into a restless sleep, a shadow moved outside her window. A pair of eyes watched from the darkness. The game had begun, and for the first time, Clara understood. In this town, the enemy wasn't the streets, the shadows, or the wind. It was him. He had chosen her, and he was patient, too patient. The next morning, Clara awoke to the cold light of dawn streaming through her blinds, her mind already racing. Sleep had offered no solace. She had dreamed of him, standing in the shadows, smiling as she tried to flee. She forced herself to rise, pulling on a coat and gloves, determined not to let fear dictate her day. But the unease clung to her like a second skin. Her first stop was Marvin's cafe. She needed routine, a small anchor of normalcy, and yet every step on the cobblestone streets made her stomach tighten. The cafe was quiet, a few early patrons sipping coffee and scrolling through phones. Clara scanned the street before entering. Empty, for now. Inside, she tried to focus on her laptop, opening a blank document to plan an article about small-town safety. The irony wasn't lost on her. She typed a few sentences, paused, and then froze as a familiar feeling prickled her neck. Someone was observing her. She turned, scanning the room. No one unusual, but she didn't need to see him to know he was there. Evan Cole, the man who had become an invisible presence in her life, had a way of making himself known without being seen. A glance from the corner of her eye, a fleeting reflection in the window, a soft footstep in the street outside. He was everywhere, yet nowhere. Her fingers trembled as she sipped her coffee. She noticed a folded paper slipped under the table. Slowly, she picked it up, her breath shallow. On it, in neat printed letters, "Why do you run? I only want to watch." Her stomach turned. She scanned the cafe again. Still, no one met her gaze. No one watched. The town continued its quiet routines, unaware of the predator threading through its streets. Clara left the cafe, taking a circuitous route back to her apartment, forcing herself to think. She realized that ignoring him or pretending he didn't exist had only given him space to grow bolder. She needed a plan, something to observe him without being observed herself. Over the next several days, she began collecting evidence in secret. She borrowed a small camera from the library, set it in the alley near her apartment, and recorded the street at night. She kept a notebook filled with sightings, times, and patterns. She noticed that Evan's movements weren't random. He seemed to know when she would leave the apartment, what stores she would visit, even which books she borrowed from the library. Her investigation revealed a terrifying realization. He was meticulous, patient, and persistent. One evening she followed him, carefully, silently, keeping her distance. He walked through the town as if guided by instinct, past streets she knew well, past houses of neighbors who remained oblivious to his presence. He stopped briefly in the square, watching a small group of teenagers laughing by the fountain. Then he turned toward her direction. Her pulse hammered in her chest as she ducked behind a corner. He had seen her, and he smiled. It was not a friendly smile nor a polite acknowledgement. It was a smile that conveyed control, calculation, and certainty. Clara's blood ran cold. He wasn't just following her, he was steadying her, testing her, toying with her. The next morning, she decided to reach out to someone she trusted. Detective Mark Rivers, a local officer known for his methodical approach and calm demeanor, had been helpful when she had asked minor questions about local incidents in the past. She recounted her experiences cautiously, careful not to let desperation leak into her voice. Detective Rivers listened, his expression neutral. He asked questions, where she had seen the man, what he looked like, what the notes said. When she finished, he sighed softly. "Clara," he said gently, "Hawthorne is a safe town. People notice strange things here all the time. I don't doubt your feelings, but there's no evidence anyone is actually following you. Maybe you're imagining patterns where none exist." Her jaw tightened. She had expected skepticism, but not dismissal. "I have notes," she said, sliding the notebook across the table. "Times, places, what he did. Look at the patterns." Detective Rivers glanced at the pages, brow furrowed. "Patterns don't prove intent, Clara. It's just coincidence or paranoia. I know it feels real, but you need to calm yourself." Clara left the station, her frustration mounting. She understood now that she couldn't rely on anyone else. The town would remain blind, and Evan would remain free to maneuver. Over the following nights, the harassment escalated. Anonymous calls in the early hours of the morning, footsteps on the stairwell outside her apartment, objects subtly moved within her own home. The fear that had once lingered at the edges of her consciousness now consumed her entirely. Then came the note taped to her door. "Tonight we play." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't stay locked inside. Not tonight. She had to understand, to confront this threat before it escalated further. She packed a small bag, pepper spray, camera, flashlight, notebook, and her phone, though she feared he could intercept it. She ventured out into the night, the streets slick with recent rain. Puddles reflected the dim lamplight, and every sound echoed in her ears. The distant bark of a dog, the clatter of a trash can lid, the soft rustle of leaves. She kept to the shadows, moving slowly, alert to every movement. And there he was. Evan stood beneath a street lamp, motionless, as if waiting for her. He did not flee when she approached, did not run. He merely observed, calm, controlled. "You came," he said softly, almost conversational. "I wondered when you would decide to join the game." Clara's breath caught. Her heart pounded so violently she feared it would betray her. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm someone who sees things others don't," he replied, tilting his head. "Someone who notices patterns, who understands control." "You've been following me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stalking me, harassing me. Why?"
He smiled again, faint, infuriatingly calm. "I told you, I only want to watch, and now you're finally seeing me." Before she could respond, he melted into the shadows, vanishing from sight. Clara stood alone, drenched from the rain, shaking with adrenaline. The streets were silent once more, but she knew the danger had only grown. He was no longer content to linger in the distance. The game had begun, and he intended to escalate. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart still racing. She reviewed her notes, replayed every encounter, every glimpse of his figure. She realized she could no longer wait for someone else to protect her. If she wanted to survive, she had to anticipate him, outthink him, and stay one step ahead. Her journal that night ended with a single line, written in jagged letters. "He's no longer watching from afar. He's in control, and I have to find a way to stop him before it's too late." Outside, in the quiet of Hawthorne, a shadow lingered near the corner of the street, eyes fixed on her window. The game had just begun, and the town, as always, remained blissfully unaware.
Clara Bennett's life had become a tightrope walk between fear and vigilance. Every morning she awoke to the realization that Evan Cole was still out there, still watching, and still waiting for her to falter. The town of Hawthorne, with its sleepy streets and well-manicured lawns, remained blissfully oblivious to the storm gathering within its borders. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. To Clara, every familiar face, every casual interaction carried the weight of uncertainty. She tried going public, sharing her fears with neighbors, local shopkeepers, and anyone who would listen. The reactions ranged from polite disbelief to outright scorn. "Clara, you're imagining things," said the librarian, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "People here don't do that." Even the cafe owner, who had served her countless cups of coffee, shook his head. "Hawthorne is safe. Don't let your imagination run wild." It was maddening. The very people who could help were blind to the danger she faced, and Evan was exploiting it. Every dismissal reinforced his control, allowing him to operate in the shadows without consequence. Clara realized she could rely on no one but herself. She began mapping his appearances, cross-referencing notes from her journal, security camera footage, and subtle observations she had made over the past weeks. Patterns emerged. He frequented the same streets, lingered near certain shops, and watched her apartment at specific times. But there was more. She noticed interactions with the townspeople, small gestures, fleeting conversations, moments of charm that went unnoticed. Evan had embedded himself in the town's daily life, using ordinary appearances as camouflage. Clara felt a chill as she considered the implications. He wasn't just stalking her, he was manipulating the entire environment around her. The more she tried to escape, the more he seemed to anticipate her every move. One night, she decided to test him. She left her apartment at her usual time, but took a completely different route, weaving through alleys, crossing streets in unexpected patterns, and slipping into areas she hadn't visited in weeks. Her heart pounded as she waited in shadowed corners, watching for signs of him. And then she saw him. Evan was standing in the middle of a small park, calm and collected, as if he had been there all along. His eyes met hers from a distance, and a slow, unnerving smile spread across his face. He wasn't hiding. He was letting her see him, showing her that distance meant nothing. Clara's mind raced. She had underestimated him. She had assumed he was cautious, careful, but now it was clear he thrived on the game itself, the tension, the fear, the knowledge that she could see him but could not touch him. Over the next several days, Clara intensified her investigation. She combed through public records, spoke to residents discreetly, and retraced his movements. Each discovery made her stomach twist.
Evan had a pattern not just of observation, but of subtle interference. He had befriended a few townspeople over the past months, people who now unknowingly provided him information. He knew when she visited the grocery store, when she stopped for coffee, even when she had guests at her apartment. The psychological toll was immense. Clara began experiencing sleepless nights, waking at odd hours, jumping at every sound. She caught herself imagining shadows where there were none, hearing footsteps that weren't there. But she refused to relent. She couldn't. If she allowed fear to paralyze her, Evan would win. Then came the breaking point. One evening, as Clara returned home from a long night of mapping his activities, she noticed her apartment door ajar. Her heart seized in her chest. Inside, the apartment was undisturbed, nothing stolen, nothing broken, but on the kitchen counter was a single photograph. It showed her, not from any obvious angle, not taken from the street, but from inside her apartment. Evan had been inside. He had watched her, documented her, and left without a trace. The photograph captured her in a moment of vulnerability, reading at the table, unaware of his presence. Trembling, Clara picked up the photograph. Written across the back in neat, precise handwriting were 3 words: "Soon they'll know." The implication was clear. Evan was planning something larger than a personal obsession. The town itself would be involved, whether they realized it or not. Panic clawed at Clara's chest, but she forced herself to think. Fear could not paralyze her. She spent the following day preparing. She gathered cameras, recording devices, and notebooks, creating a trail of evidence that could not be ignored. She studied Evan's movements obsessively, predicting where he might strike next. And then she realized the terrifying truth. He had infiltrated systems beyond her observation. Security cameras near the square, the library, and even the local police station had been subtly manipulated. He had eyes everywhere. Clara knew she couldn't confront him blindly. She had to create a controlled environment, a situation where she could anticipate his moves and regain some measure of power. As night fell, she set out, carrying a bag of essentials: camera, flashlight, phone, and pepper spray. The streets were slick with rain, the lamplights casting long reflections on puddles. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, every sound amplified in the quiet of the town. And there he was, standing under a street lamp at the corner she had just passed, as if he had been there all along. His eyes met hers from a distance, and a slow, unnerving smile spread across his face. He wasn't hiding, he was letting her see him, showing her that distance meant nothing. Clara's mind raced. She had underestimated him. She had assumed he was cautious, careful, but now it was clear he thrived on the game itself, the tension, the fear, the knowledge that she could see him but could not touch him. Over the next several days, Clara intensified her investigation. She combed through public records, spoke to residents discreetly, and retraced his movements. Each discovery made her stomach twist. Evan had a pattern not just of observation, but of subtle interference. He had befriended a few townspeople over the past months, people who now unknowingly provided him information. He knew when she visited the grocery store, when she stopped for coffee, even when she had guests at her apartment. The psychological toll was immense. Clara began experiencing sleepless nights, waking at odd hours, jumping at every sound. She caught herself imagining shadows where there were none, hearing footsteps that weren't there. But she refused to relent. She couldn't. If she allowed fear to paralyze her, Evan would win. Then came the breaking point. One evening, as Clara returned home from a long night of mapping his activities, she noticed her apartment door ajar. Her heart seized in her chest. Inside, the apartment was undisturbed, nothing stolen, nothing broken, but on the kitchen counter was a single photograph. It showed her, not from any obvious angle, not taken from the street, but from inside her apartment. Evan had been inside. He had watched her, documented her, and left without a trace. The photograph captured her in a moment of vulnerability, reading at the table, unaware of his presence. Trembling, Clara picked up the photograph. Written across the back in neat, precise handwriting were 3 words: "Soon they'll know." The implication was clear. Evan was planning something larger than a personal obsession. The town itself would be involved, whether they realized it or not. Panic clawed at Clara's chest, but she forced herself to think. Fear could not paralyze her. She spent the following day preparing. She gathered cameras, recording devices, and notebooks, creating a trail of evidence that could not be ignored. She studied Evan's movements obsessively, predicting where he might strike next. And then she realized the terrifying truth. He had infiltrated systems beyond her observation. Security cameras near the square, the library, and even the local police station had been subtly manipulated. He had eyes everywhere. Clara knew she couldn't confront him blindly. She had to create a controlled environment, a situation where she could anticipate his moves and regain some measure of power. As night fell, she set out, carrying a bag of essentials: camera, flashlight, phone, and pepper spray. The streets were slick with rain, the lamplights casting long reflections on puddles. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, every sound amplified in the quiet of the town. And there he was, standing under a street lamp at the corner she had just passed, as if he had been there all along. His eyes met hers from a distance, and a slow, unnerving smile spread across his face. He wasn't hiding, he was letting her see him, showing her that distance meant nothing. Clara's mind raced. She had underestimated him. She had assumed he was cautious, careful, but now it was clear he thrived on the game itself, the tension, the fear, the knowledge that she could see him but could not touch him. Over the next
Clara Bennett had planned every step. For weeks, she had mapped Evan Cole's routines, studied his behaviors, and anticipated his next moves. Now, the town of Hawthorne, still unaware of the predator weaving through its streets, would become a stage for the final act of his obsession. But this time, Clara would not be passive. She would confront him, expose him, and end the game. The night was unusually quiet, a heavy mist curling along the cobblestone streets. Clara positioned cameras along the route she predicted Evan would take. She carried a small backpack with essentials: flashlight, recording devices, pepper spray, and her notebook, her lifeline in this ordeal. She had arranged to meet Detective Mark Rivers, the only ally who had finally begun to understand her warnings, at the edge of the town square. Together, they would lure Evan into a controlled confrontation. Clara's heart raced as she waited behind a lamppost, the mist blurring her vision. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every distant sound a potential signal. She knew Evan was aware of her plan, he always knew, but she had accounted for his cunning. She could not predict everything, but she could create the conditions to regain control. And then she saw him. Evan stepped into the square with calm precision, his gaze sweeping the area as if surveying the stage. He did not rush, he did not panic, he simply observed, confident in his mastery of the situation. His eyes found Clara immediately, a faint smile touching his lips. "Welcome," he said softly, his voice carrying over the mist. "I wondered when we would arrive at this moment." Clara swallowed her fear and stepped forward, keeping her movements deliberate. "It's over, Evan. Your obsession ends tonight. The town will see what you are." He laughed quietly, a chilling sound that echoed in the empty square. "Do you think this is about me? No, Clara. This is about control, about patterns, about watching life unfold while others are blind. You understand that now, don't you?"
Clara glanced at Detective Rivers, who emerged from the shadows with a small recording device in hand. He nodded subtly. Together, they had set up a series of cameras throughout the square, ensuring that every angle of Evan's actions would be documented. Evan's gaze flicked to the devices, his smile widening. "Ah, clever. I wondered if you would think ahead. You are resourceful, I'll give you that." Clara's pulse surged. She raised her voice so that nearby streets could hear, projecting authority. "Everyone here and everyone watching later will know the truth. Your manipulation, your stalking, your threats, they end now." Evan's calm demeanor faltered ever so slightly, just enough for Clara to see the first crack in his composure. "Do you think they will believe you? The town sleeps, blind to everything around them. They never see the danger until it's too late." Detective Rivers stepped forward, his voice steady. "Not this time. Not with evidence. Not with witnesses. Your time hiding in plain sight is over." Clara activated her cameras, ensuring that every movement and word would be recorded. Evan's expression shifted, no longer just amusement, but curiosity tinged with the faintest shadow of concern. He circled them slowly, almost like a predator assessing the boundaries of its territory. "You've been clever," he addressed Clara directly. "I watched your routines, your fears, the patterns you created to predict me. But patterns can be broken, and when they are—" his voice trailed, leaving the threat hanging in the misty air. "You don't get to threaten anyone anymore," Clara said firmly. "Your obsession is over. The town will see the truth, and justice will be done." Evan's eyes darted around the square, noting the subtle positioning of cameras, the streetlights casting shadows, the faint figures of neighbors who had begun to gather at the sound of voices. For the first time, the illusion of control wavered. "Do you think this ends with one confrontation? You cannot stop what you have not understood. Patterns, control, obsession, they live beyond you. I am not just one man. I am the structure of observation itself." Clara's hands shook, but her resolve hardened. "And I am the one who exposes it." With a sudden movement, Evan lunged toward the edge of the square, attempting to evade the cameras, to create chaos. But Detective Rivers was prepared. He stepped forward, his hand gripping Evan's arm firmly. Clara recorded every moment, capturing his resistance, his threatening posture, and the precise calm with which they immobilized him. Evan struggled, and for the first time, fear appeared in his eyes, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability hidden beneath the mask of obsession. "You cannot understand me," he hissed, but the words were weaker now. Clara pressed the recording button on her camera, capturing every confession, every revelation, every twisted explanation of his obsession. The town, still blind moments before, began to witness the unraveling of a man who had hidden in plain sight for weeks. Neighbors who had emerged to see the commotion gasped as details emerged. Clara's voice narrated the story of Evan's stalking, his manipulation of social circles, his careful study of her routines. She revealed the notes, the photographs, the anonymous calls, and the methods he had used to exploit the trust and complacency of the town. Evan's confidence crumbled as recognition dawned in the eyes of those around him. He realized too late that control could not be maintained when every detail had been documented and exposed. His charm, his patience, his subtle manipulations, all laid bare. Detective Rivers called for backup, securing Evan as Clara continued to narrate the timeline of his obsession. The town, once naive and blind, now understood the danger that had lurked among them, invisible yet omnipresent. Fear, disbelief, and relief mingled in their faces. At last, Evan was led away in handcuffs, protesting, attempting to rationalize his actions, but it was futile. Clara's evidence was irrefutable, her testimony precise, and the town had finally witnessed the full scope of his obsession. Clara leaned against the railing of her apartment balcony that night, exhausted but resolute. The streets of Hawthorne were quiet again, the mist curling along the cobblestones, but the town had changed. The illusion of safety had been shattered, replaced with vigilance and awareness. She allowed herself a small, cautious smile, knowing that the danger had been confronted and contained, yet in the depths of her mind a faint unease remained. Patterns were broken, obsessions ended, but shadows lingered. As Clara prepared to leave the balcony, a flicker of movement in the distance caught her eye. Across the empty street, a figure lingered just beyond the lamplight. For a heartbeat, she thought she recognized the posture, the patience, the quiet menace of the eyes. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let fear control her. She had survived. She had exposed the truth. Whatever this new shadow was, she would confront it as she confronted Evan. And as the mist drifted through the town, Clara realized the final lesson she had learned. Vigilance was eternal. The town might sleep, but she would never allow herself to be blind again. The predator had been caught, but the echoes of obsession and control lingered in the streets of Hawthorne, reminding everyone that danger often hides in plain sight, and that sometimes the most terrifying shadows are the ones you never see coming.